My younger son, Miles, is a pilot. When he calls me from the sky, his voice carries a hush I never hear on land. This time, I didn't even move from the kitchen. My hand was on the counter, the dish towel still damp over my shoulder, the shower running upstairs. "Mom," he said, calm but clipped. "Something's wrong." Emily just boarded my flight. Seat 2A. I'm holding her real ID. "That's impossible," I told him. "She's home." She just said she was taking a shower. Silence. The kind that makes the air feel thinner. And then, the water upstairs stopped. "Mom," he said. Not like a boy, not like a man exactly either. Like a professional who had pulled his heart behind a zipper. "Something's wrong." "What's wrong?" I asked, though I was already listening harder than I usually can. "Emily just boarded my flight," he said. "Seat 2A. I'm holding her real ID in my hands." I stared at the banister. The upstairs bathroom fan drowned the usual house creaks. "That's impossible," I said. "She's here. She's upstairs." She called down that she was taking a quick shower before work. There was a pause, the kind where the world's air seems to thin. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm looking right at her." First class, window, seat 2, A. At that very moment, I heard the water shut off, the click that always follows when Emily's done and she pulls back the shower curtain to grab a towel. Footsteps moved along the hall, precise and quick, the way she always walks when she has a list in her head. The stairs gave a familiar sigh. I felt a strange cold at my elbows. "I've got to go," Miles whispered. "They're closing the door." "Okay," I said, though nothing was okay. "Text me when you're on the ground." "I will," he said. And then there was only the delicate hiss of a call cut off by altitude. "Mom?" "I'm glad you're home," a voice said from the hallway behind me. I turned around and there she was. Emily, my daughter-in-law, towel-dried hair tucked behind her ear, a sky-blue dress already on, her cheeks pink from the steam. She smiled, that bright morning kind she wears for us and the world, and reached for the navy tote that was waiting under the coat hooks. Her nails were painted a pale color like salt water. I had a second-long urge to ask her to hold out her hand so I could count the fingers. "Target, the office, then Oliver's pickup," she said. "Do you need anything?" "Batteries?" "We always need batteries." "Just your company," I said, because joking is what I do when I can't say what's truly inside me. "But batteries will do." She laughed and slipped the strap over her shoulder, and I noticed, because I notice small things, that she did it with her left hand. Emily writes lists with her right hand. Maybe she was just switching it up. People do that sometimes. She kissed the air near my cheek in a way that didn't smear lipstick and pulled the door, and then she was gone. My name is Eleanor Hart. People who worked with me for 30 years call me Nell, and I don't mind when people call me Grandma either. I retired from a middle school library last spring and still hear the ghost of my own shh sometimes when commercials come on too loud. My older son, Caleb, is a municipal architect who thinks in lines and codes. My younger son, Miles, lives his life above most weather. Emily married into us 5 years ago with a bouquet of white peonies and a look that told me my son was being seen and chosen at the exact same time. Oliver is 7 now, their son, with cowlicks like commas and a habit of carrying a folded drawing in his pocket like a tiny declaration. We live in a neighborhood where the lawns pretend to be effortless and the homeowners association leaves flyers about trash bin placement tucked in mailboxes like hymnals. I stood there in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, one on the dish towel, and looked at the closed front door where the light from the sidelight stripes itself onto the floor during most mornings, and I tried to swallow a feeling I didn't have a label for. If you are hearing this with me, do an old librarian a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read them. Not because I love the attention, but because strangers' thoughts are sometimes the lanterns that help grandmothers cross dark rooms. I reached for the junk drawer and pulled out a narrow spiral notebook with a bent plastic cover. Librarians don't fight chaos with fists. We fight with paper. I opened to the first clean page and wrote, 9:38 a.m. Emily says office. Left in sky blue dress with navy tote. New perfume. Miles, says Emily. Boarded BOS flight seat 2A, holding her Real ID. Then I wrote a line I hate seeing in my own hand. If she is here and there, what am I missing? By 10:30, I had washed and rewashed a pan that wasn't dirty. By 11, I had rearranged the magnets on the fridge into a new constellation. Grocery list, dentist reminder, a picture of Oliver with his arm thrown around his father's neck so carelessly it could break your heart. By noon, 3 details had stacked like paper folders in my mind. First, the navy tote Emily picked up was not the navy tote that hangs by our door. Hers is scuffed at the bottom, and the leather on the strap is turned dark where it rubs against her coat. This one looked newer, crisp where it should have been worn. Second, the coffee receipt she left by the fruit bowl had a name written at the top that was not hers, Jessa. Third, the text from the dental office on the family phone, "Would you confirm the noon patient?" had been met with an automatic reply that said, "On PTO today." I stared at the sentence until the letters separated from their meanings and still didn't make sense of it. At 1, Mrs. Atkins rang the bell, standing on the porch with her HOA binder hugged to her like scripture. She has 2 permanent lines between her eyebrows from caring so hard about recycling schedules. But she is kind, and when she is not reading bylaws, she watches out for the children who ride scooters too fast on the sidewalk. "Eleanor, dear," she began, which is how she always begins difficult things. "You know I don't pry." She pries. But it is the prying of an elder who believes safety is a communal craft. "I waved to Emily this morning," she continued, "twice. Once at 8, once at 11. The second time she looked right past me in that way, chin up, you know. That isn't like her. 'I'll tell her you said hello,' I said, and felt as if I had forged my name. When she left, I wrote, 'Mrs. Atkins says E waved past her. 8 a.m. Nice. 11 a.m. cold. I am not a detective. I am a mother with a pen, and sometimes that is the same thing.' At 2, Miles texted me, a simple on the ground. A minute later, another text. She deplaned with a tall man, gray coat, expensive shoes. He carried her bag like it belonged to him. Then a third. I can't send photos from the cabin. Rules. I stared at those words, rules, and thought about all the different kinds we live under. FAA, HOA, family. I made chicken salad the way Caleb likes, with pickles chopped too small to notice. When he came home at 5:30, he smelled like City Hall hallways and cold wind, and he kissed my forehead and set his laptop bag by the couch. Oliver ran down the hall from where he'd been drawing a maze with more dead ends than any maze should have, and he threw himself onto his father with all the force 48 pounds allows. Emily came in at 6 with a polite hello, her tone 1 degree off the familiar, like a radio just barely out of tune. The smell of her perfume, warm vanilla or something close to it, was not the smell I'd caught in the hallway when she walked by me after her shower that morning. Now it was softer, closer to the one I know. Her hair was tucked behind her ear, a small flaw in the polish. The nail of the right ring finger chipped. At dinner, Oliver knocked over his water and froze. In that way children do when they can tell the adults in the room will make a small thing larger by the look on their faces. I reached for the towel. "It's just a puddle," I said, and dabbed at the corner of the placemat. He breathed again. "Oliver," Emily said, not loudly but with an edge I had never heard, "you are not a toddler." This table is not a splash pad. Caleb looked up from his plate and offered a smile I recognized from when he was 12 and wanted the adults to say less. "It's fine," he said gently. "He'll be more careful." Emily cut her chicken without looking up. The knife flashed. The room felt like it had lost a degree of warmth. I have lived long enough to know that once you tell yourself you are imagining things, you have already noticed them. I did not ask Emily about Boston. I did not ask her why the tote looked new. I did not ask her who Jessa was. Instead, I cleared dishes and wrote in my notebook while the dishwasher hummed like a radio between stations. The next day, I took Oliver's rocket drawing to the German Village coffee shop we both like because they let him add an extra star sticker to the kids' cups, and they always remember to talk to him directly. Deontay, the barista with eyelashes better than any of the 7th grade girls I used to scold for applying mascara in the stacks, recognized me and pulled 2 cups without asking, one small, one medium. "Mrs. Hart," he said, setting the cups down, "I think I messed up your daughter-in-law's drink yesterday." She ordered an oat milk latte with cinnamon on Monday and then a double espresso black on Tuesday. I wrote Emily both times and she told me to make it for Jess. He shrugged. "Maybe she's switching things up." "And how did she seem to you?" I asked, as casually as a woman can when everything inside her is leaning forward. "Monday, she was chatty," he said, "told me she liked my playlist. Tuesday, she stared over my head like she was reading a menu I couldn't see." He looked embarrassed. "People have moods." "I know. It's just, it felt like 2 different people." I did not joke then. I wrote, "coffee shop." Deontay noticed 2 different orders and the name Jess. Monday warm, Tuesday cold, same face. He slid a card across to me. "She dropped this," he said. "I didn't mean to look." The logo is hard to miss. It was a thick business card with raised silver letters, Pierce and Fenwick Realty. The name at the bottom was Graham Pierce, managing partner. I put it in my pocket and thanked him, then made a note to drive past their office at dusk when the lights would be on and the glass would turn the inside out. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store and walked aisles I know as well as the Dewey Decimal System. I bought lemons because they prove you are paying attention. I bought milk. I almost bought batteries and then didn't. In the parking lot, the sky had that stubborn Ohio gray that makes you believe you are living under a lid. I sat for a second longer than necessary before turning the key. On Saturday, when Emily said Target and Costco and held up the tote like a prop, I decided to do a thing I do not like to do. I followed her. Not close enough to be foolish, but close enough to learn a staircase's habits. I know how to walk without being noticed. Librarians practice disappearing all the time. At Target, she never went in. She cut behind the loading dock, her feet knowing where to step to avoid puddles, and crossed Glenmont, where old duplexes lean their shoulders into one another like old arguments. She knocked on a blue door with peeling paint, 214, and the door opened almost at once. I stood by a fence whose slats were spaced just far enough apart for a grandmother's eye and pretended to take a picture of a peony that hadn't yet decided to bloom. 20 minutes later, the door opened again, and a woman stepped out, who was not my daughter-in-law, and yet, if you took a quick look and then looked away and then looked back, could have been. Same build, same long, dark hair parted in the same place. But the eyes were softer and the shoes were wrong, like she wasn't used to wearing that kind of heel for walking. She saw me the way deer do, startled but still. "Can I help you?" she asked, and then added in a voice that made me see the living room behind her the way you can see a home through tone alone. "Do you need directions?" "I think," I said, and then stopped, because I had rehearsed a dozen sentences, and none of them fit the mouth I had to say them with. "You might already be helping me without knowing it." Her hand tightened on the doorknob. "I'm Jessa," she said, as if I had asked, though I hadn't. The name slid across the space between us and landed on the stack of notes in my own mind. "I'm Nell," I said. Then I asked the question women must ask when they are crossing moral rivers. "May I come in?" Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and effort. There was a small couch and a thrifted coffee table and a shoebox pushed under it the way people push things away they still want close. She sat and pulled the box toward us and opened the lid, and I saw papers that lived on that rare line where private and necessary meet. I am not trying to hurt anyone, she said. I want you to know that first. Emily. Your Emily? Found me last year. She also told me her name was M. She said she'd been looking for me. She said we looked alike and that could be useful. Useful? I repeated. It is a word that rarely means kindness when spoken in a certain tone. She said she could pay me to do errands, to pick up her boy sometimes, to go to the same coffee shop and order the same thing so people would see her, you know? She looked at me as if asking me to fill her sentence with whatever would shock me least. Later, she asked me to cover a day and then two. She said she wanted time. I said yes, because my rent doesn't care whether I'm confused. Why you? I asked, though the answer was already forming. Because I am, she said, and it was the only time her voice sounded like it might break. Her sister. Not raised together. Closed adoption, 2 babies, 2 files, 2 houses, 2 stories that didn't cross for 3 decades and then did. She found me through a searcher. She told me I could be helpful. She told me I was lucky. I said yes, because when someone finds you like that, you want to believe luck has finally decided to call your number. She slid a handful of photocopies across the table. I touched the top page with 2 fingers like my own skin might burn it if I used my whole hand. There was a copied hospital bracelet, the ink a faded black. There was a birth record with chunks redacted by solid rectangles. The date was the same as Emily's. There was a letter that looked like it had been folded and unfolded so many times it would no longer lie flat. In the corner was a name, Reyes. Another, Vargas. I traced them with my eyes and felt the shape of our family shift, not in destruction, but in rearrangement. I told Emily I didn't want to talk to her family, Jessa said quietly, that I was not trying to come and steal anyone's place. She said there were rules. Don't look people in the eye too long. Don't stay when the husband gets home. Buy cilantro, not parsley. Always leave before homework time. She laughed once, quick and without humor. She paid me more than anyone has ever paid me for anything, and I told myself that money can be moral if you repeat the right words in your head. Then she asked for more. She asked for hours in the middle of the day. She asked for silence. She pushed a business card toward me, one I had already seen a twin of, but this one had notes scribbled on the back in a neat hand that was not Emily's. Graham Pierce, managing partner, an address downtown, a date, a time. I waited for her in a car once, Jessa said, outside a condo with windows for walls. She came out with him, the man on the card. He carried her bag and she laughed a laugh that didn't sound like me. I'm not judging a laugh. God knows I won't be the one to write a law about laughter. But I thought that if there was a boy at home waiting for her and a husband who knows how she likes her tea, then that laugh belonged at a different table than the one she was using. I wrote Jessa's name in my notebook and did not look at her while I did it, so it would feel like the thing I was doing was holding her rather than labeling her. What do you want? I asked, the only question that counts when you are halfway into someone else's story. To not feel like a thief, she said. To give back what isn't mine. To not make your grandson wonder which version of a woman is his mother. I don't think you are the thief here, I said, but I do think you are the person who can hand me the flashlight I need. When I drove home along High Street, the city looked like it was wearing a costume. The Target sign was a prop. The grocery store was a set. The tidy lawns were a script. I walked into my house, and Emily was already there, chopping cilantro, a half lullaby in her mouth that I had sung to my boys when they were small, and it felt exactly like someone had reached into a drawer they had no right to open and taken something small and precious to wear for a little while. Target? I asked, casually as I could. They were out of batteries, she said, not looking up. Target, I repeated, and I'm not proud of how much I put into that one word. She finally looked at me and smiled like she knows what I can bear and what I can't. Yes, Mom, she said, and pushed the cilantro into a bowl like she was erasing a line. That night, alone in my room with the lamp on and the rest of the house quiet, I looked at the family photo that lives on the table by my bed, Caleb's wedding day. Oliver a small butter roll of a baby wrapped in a blanket, Emily standing in white, sunlight in her hair, looking at me and at us, as if she had been offered exactly the life she'd always wanted and had said yes twice, just to be sure. Miles texted, "I'm not sending anything from the cabin. Rules." But then a second text arrived, a soft, low-angle photo from the jetway where phones are allowed, a woman in the frame, face turned 3/4, light from the cabin window falling across the jawline I now knew could be one of two, the caption, "Within the rules." That's all I can do. Some investigations you can hand to police and they will stamp and file and call you with something like justice. Others you can only hand to God and your own courage. I am not a saint, but I am a grandmother, and I have learned those two things are sometimes closer than you think. The next day, I set lemons on the counter because lemon light is the kind that makes truth seem possible. I called Miles. "I need you to teach me what a citizen can pull from public records," I said, "the kind of looking that is legal and decent." "Mom," he said, with a tenderness pilots don't get to use at altitude, "you were born for this part." I pulled the county property search, a thing I have taught children to use for social studies, projects, on tax levies. I typed Pierce and then Pierce and Fenwick. I looked up LLCS registered to addresses that were also valet stands. I taught myself the way business filings sometimes hide wives behind vendor names and friends behind consulting labels. I printed pages I didn't yet fully understand and laid them in neat stacks the way I had once laid out picture books for a second-grade class and knew I would understand them after I read them twice. I went to the library, the other one, not the one I had left behind, and asked a young reference librarian who wore her hair in a top knot and her pens in her shirt pocket how to search campaign contributions, and she taught me the way good librarians always do, with patience and a pencil. I noted dates, and I noted that dates tell their own stories if you let them sit next to one another long enough. Mrs. Atkins came by with lemon bars because she knows my language and stood in my doorway with her binder open to a page that was not a bylaw. "My neighbor's cousin," she said, lowering her voice the way people do when they are about to say a name they expect you to recognize, bought a condo from a Graham Pierce, and she says the man has a way of making married women believe their lives were accidents. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it for more than the bars. I cooked 3 kinds of salad because the truth deserves options. I put a white tablecloth on the table because clean linen tells people we are trying. I texted Caleb and Emily and Miles and asked them to come for dinner. I called Jessa and asked her to come too. "I don't want to be the ambush," she said. "You won't be," I said. "You will be the person who stops me from being alone." Miles arrived with his hair still recovering from headset pressure and a small stack of papers that anyone with time could find, which is the entire point. Caleb came with Oliver, who ran immediately to the living room to construct a rocket from couch cushions that would never fly but always land. Emily walked in wearing a light dress and a smile that was all edge, no curve. I poured iced tea no one would drink. We ate 3 bites each. I folded my napkin the way a verdict looks when it is trying not to be cruel, and I looked at Emily as if she were someone I was meeting for the first time in a library, with kindness, but attention. "Miles saw you on a flight to Boston," I said. "Seat 2A. She set down her fork and lifted one eyebrow the way people do when they are about to deny a fact they wish would go away, simply by refusing to name it. "Your son mistook someone." Jessa stepped out from the kitchen doorway where she had been waiting with her hands twisted in front of her like she was trying to wring out water. Caleb stood so quickly, his chair scraped the floor and made Oliver look up from his rocket with wide animal eyes. Emily did not crumble. She hardened the way clay does when it goes from soft to what they call fired, what can't be reshaped by hand anymore. "Jessa," she said in a tone as controlled as a straight line, "I told you the rules." I slid the stack of public filings onto the table. "I learned to read long before I learned to be anyone's mother," I said softly. "Graham Pierce, Condos LLCS, weekday day trips that weren't to the dental office, payments from a marketing vendor to J. Reyes, names attached to properties that coincidentally line up with the days my daughter-in-law had PTOI. Looked at Emily then. You can tell me I am wrong, but then you will need to tell me why these lines draw a picture of your face. Emily, Caleb said, and he did not say anything else because his mouth could not find a shape for the rest of his sentence. She chose not to answer him. She looked at me, which told me who she had decided the judge of this particular court would be. It's what adults do, she said, when they are tired, when they don't want to cut coupons and pretend to be thrilled by clogged drains and science fair trifolds. Oliver made a sound I have only heard once before, from a dog that had wandered into our yard to die. I reached for him under the table as if we could both hide there. You used me, Miles said, not loudly, but in a register that made the air take a step back. You used my eyes. You used my rules. And you used the person who shares your face. Everyone used everyone, Emily said, and for the first time her control flickered. She wanted money. I wanted time. Your brother wants to be the good one. Your mother wants to be the martyr who saves the family by typing in other people's names. Time with whom? I asked. Silence is never silent. It is a held breath you either use to steady yourself or use to lie better. She let it stretch until I thought it might snap, and then she spoke. With someone, she said, who doesn't smell like municipal hallways and printer toner. Caleb flinched a little, because there are sentences you cannot defend yourself against when you are a decent man with a lunch pail life. He put his hand on his ring like he needed to check that it existed in the world and not just as a groove in his skin. Emily, I said, we can be angry after we are honest. The order matters. If you love Oliver, even if every other sentence you tell yourself is about how it is your right to do what you need to survive, say something true now. For him, she looked at my grandson. He was trying not to cry because boys are taught that before women are taught anything else. She swallowed. Then she looked at Jessa and said, You think you can live in the life I built? You think you can walk into the kitchen and call my mother-in-law Mom just because you share my face? You are a shadow I hired by the hour. Jessa's shoulders curled as if a cold wind had blown through the room. I'm not here to replace you, she said. I am trying to give back the hours I stole in the name of surviving. You stole nothing, I said, and my voice was not the voice I use for story time. It was offered and taken. The theft was at the beginning, not the end. There are scenes where doors slam and plates break. This was not one of those. This was the kind where people are bent over by the weight of what they've done, and the weight of what they can no longer pretend not to know, and so their hands are too busy to throw anything. Emily left with her keys in her fist. The door swung back and hit the jamb and swung again, and I thought about how very hard it is to close anything well. In the weeks that followed, justice did not so much arrive as stack up on our counter in manila envelopes. Attorneys' names replaced recipe cards in a neat row. There were forms, and there were signatures, and there was a day when Caleb took off his ring and set it on the nightstand, and it rolled and then stopped. And we both watched it the way you watch a child on a bicycle for the first time, leaning forward as if your body could will balance into something that must find it on its own. Emily did not ask for custody. She signed where she was asked to and walked away with a kind of relief on her face that made me sicker than sorrow did. Some people feel free when they cut ties. I think Emily felt invisible and mistook it for freedom. Graham Pierce's name disappeared from the Pierce and Fenwick website the way names disappear when men have enough money to hire new letters. His partners expressed regret to a reporter from a local newsletter. Their regret sounded like microphones. We were left to do the slow work. Caleb buried himself in maps and approvals and came home with a face that wouldn't stop frowning until Oliver climbed into his lap and unfurled there, without a single word, like a letter from a good friend. Miles took Oliver to the airport observation deck and taught him how to watch planes take off and land in a way that calms the human body, because up and down are laws you can lean against. Oliver came home smelling like jet fuel and mints and said he wanted to be up there too. Mrs. Atkins left casseroles the size of small suitcases on our porch with notes that sounded like orders and prayers mixed. Jessa showed up the next morning at 9 with a Tupperware full of soup so hot she had to hold it with 2 pot holders. "I'm not trying to fit in a place," she said, standing on our porch like a student late to class. "I am trying to be a person you don't have to worry will vanish in the middle of a sentence." "You are welcome here," I said, and I meant it in that strict way hospitality needs to be meant sometimes so the guest can relax. She did not try to be mother or sister or saint. She cooked and cleaned and left when I tilted my head in the way women use to communicate things we can't say with children listening. She sat with Oliver on the floor and drew rockets with him, and when he asked if she knew how to draw a horse, she said badly, and then drew one anyway, and he laughed the kind of laugh that cleans a house. He called her Aunt Jessa first. Then one night, half asleep and halfway to a dream, he whispered, "Mom," and the room went very still. Caleb stood in the doorway and let the word pass through him like rain through a screen. He did not correct the boy. There are corrections that help and corrections that harm. Librarians learn when to shelve a note and when to shove it away. Months later, when the court part of this was done and the forms were in drawers and the envelope from the last attorney had been recycled with a small ceremony nobody admitted was a ceremony, I called a social worker named Tasha Kim. I found her by reading reviews written by people who sounded like they had needed someone to hold the handle of a dark door and had found a hand they could trust. She treats paperwork like it has feelings. She sat at our table with us and helped us request exactly what the closed adoption laws would let us see, and not an inch more. And when the file arrived, copies, not originals, always halfway to what you hope for, she laid them on the table like a pastor lays down bread. We read, and the sentences found us. There had been a young woman who could take one baby home to a one-bedroom apartment and feed her, and there had been another baby they told her she had no capacity for, and men in ties had called it mercy. There had been a city that believed secrecy would glue lives together if you kept the lid on it long enough. There had been an older nurse who whispered to the young woman that sorrow is not a chronic condition, and the young woman had whispered back that she hoped she was right. The file did not give us reasons. Files rarely do. It gave us dates and hospital wristband numbers and a set of initials that made the hair on my arms stand up, JR. That is what Jessa has written on the corner of her bills when she makes a list she is trying to will into being. Jessa did not ask for more than her file gave. She folded the papers back the way Tasha had shown her, gently, the way you return a borrowed book. She laid her hand on the stack and said, "It is enough to know I was not a ghost." And then she got up and started the tea kettle. I could end here, and in another life I might have, with the image of a kettle near boiling and a family learning how to sit in a room without the person who once made it smell like vanilla. But truth is a long thing. It needs tending. There was the time Oliver came home with a drawing of 2 women holding his hands, and the teacher had written, at the top, "We love our families," and he had gotten a little red in the face and shoved it into his backpack, and I found it in his room in 3 pieces. I taped it together, and he scowled at me and said, "Grandma, not everything needs fixing," and I had to apologize because he was right. There was the night Caleb looked at me and said he didn't know if he would be a person who would ever love a woman again who had eyelashes and a laugh and a way of tying her shoes that made his throat feel like it ought to learn new words. I told him he did not need to decide anything except whether he would keep getting up and making Oliver oatmeal and showing up to the meetings where people need architects to be sensible. He did. By doing that, he built something, a small room inside himself, where eventually something like trust could come and sit. There was the afternoon I found Jessa sitting in her car outside our house, both hands on the wheel, staring at our maple tree, crying without making any sound. I went outside and sat in the passenger seat without asking and handed her the old handkerchief I keep in my pocket for when other people's faces lose their way. "I don't know where to put my hands," she said. I told her she could put them wherever she needed to, and I would rearrange the rules. There was the day Emily showed up, 6 months after the last page had been signed, and stood on our porch with a paper bag that had a sweater inside and said flatly, "I thought he might want this." And Oliver took it and looked at her like a boy looks at a window. He's not sure he's allowed to open, and he said thank you because we have taught him the sentence that keeps the world from tilting. And she nodded once. And I did not invite her in because there are invitations that are kind and there are invitations that are cruel, and I have learned the difference the hard way. She walked away with her shoulders hunched up around her ears like she was cold, even though it was warm out, and I did not pray for her to be punished. I prayed for her to be spared from the kind of loneliness money cannot soften. I do not know if anyone heard me. When Oliver turned 8, we set up folding chairs in the backyard and hung paper lanterns from the maple tree and made the kind of cupcakes children love and adults pretend to love. Mrs. Atkins brought a tray of cookies shaped like stars. Miles lifted Oliver high enough to slap a piñata that drooped like a tired moon. Jessa handed out napkins and watched from the edge, like she was waiting for a cue, only she would understand. Caleb stood in the soft evening light with his hands on his hips, and that look men get when they realize feeding a boy and keeping the lights on and remembering to switch the laundry is a kind of glory. I sat down in a lawn chair and let the sounds of my backyard do what they were made to do, prove that joy can go on after a roof has been ripped off. A year later, after seasons had turned and landscapes had been salted and thawed and salted again, after soccer games and science projects, and the first time Oliver rode his bike without anyone running behind him, I walked into the kitchen and found Caleb standing by the sink with a small blue box in his hand and a look on his face that made his beard look like it had only grown, so he would have something to rub when he was nervous. Jessa was sitting at the table twisting a napkin into a rope. Oliver was at the counter building a rocket from toothpicks and marshmallows. The house smelled like garlic and Sunday afternoon. "I'm not asking anyone to replace anyone," Caleb said gently to both the women and to me. "I'm asking you to join us where we are. Would you like to be my wife and Oliver's mother in the way that word means showing up, not erasing?" Jessa cried the way women cry when the life they were handed and the life they made up with their own 2 hands suddenly meet and shake hands like grown-ups. She said yes. Oliver said, "Do I get a tux?" I said, "You get whatever suit makes you feel like the drummer in a band." And he chose a tiny navy bow tie and sneezed when he tried on the boutonniere. We had the wedding in our yard because the maple tree understands things buildings don't. I stood in the front row and watched my older son look at a woman who had once been paid to pretend and now was being asked to simply be. And I thought of all the different ways people come into a family, through doors, through adoptions, through mistakes that are not ours, and through courage that is. Miles stood at his brother's side with a tie not quite straight and a look that would have made his father proud. Oliver handed over the rings with a seriousness that would have made any judge approve. I cried for the old reasons and the new ones and let both kinds of tears touch each other on my cheeks until they weren't 2 kinds anymore. If you have listened to me this far, you have given me the only thing people cannot buy in a condo with windows for walls, your time. I used to think the bravest thing a grandmother could do was to keep peace. Now I think the bravest thing might be to keep truth, and to keep it without bitterness, which is the kind of labor nobody outside a kitchen or a hospital knows is heavy. There are things I would do differently. I would ask more questions earlier. I would accept fewer jokes as answers. I would write in my notebook and not apologize for doing so, but I would still invite people to my table who do not know where else to sit. I would still put a white tablecloth on the night we told the truth. I would still stop myself from throwing a plate, even though for a second it would have felt so very good. I would still tell my grandson that the door is not closing on him, not ever, not while I have a say. When Miles calls me from the sky now, which he does sometimes when he's at the gate and there is a minute before he has to tuck his voice inside again, I stand in the kitchen and listen to the announcements in the background and think about how many lives depend on a man keeping his rules. He asks after Oliver, and after me, and after Mrs. Atkins's HOA battles, and after the maple tree, and he tells me the cloud tops look like a place God would have his breakfast. When he lands, he texts, and I count his check-ins like beads. I built a small altar on my dresser, though I would not have used that word a year ago. On it, there is a photo of my husband who left us too early, a rock Oliver found at the park and insisted was lucky, a slip of paper with the first line of a poem I love, and a note written in Jessa's slightly crooked hand that says, "Dinner at 6, don't be late." The handwriting is not Emily's, and that is a grief that will not vanish entirely, but grief is not an infestation. It is a roommate who pays rent if you let it. I am not a judge. I am a grandmother with a gavel in my kitchen drawer that is really only a wooden spoon. But if I could bang it on the table and send out a sentence that would both bind and set free, I would say this. If you are a grandmother standing in your kitchen with a dish towel over your shoulder and a feeling you can't label, go get a notebook. Write down what you see. Ask the questions you fear. Invite the people who are ready to tell you the thing they swore they wouldn't say. And when you must choose between quiet and justice, pick the one your grandson will thank you for when he is taller than you. If you are still here with me, please like this story, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read them at night with a cup of tea after Oliver is asleep and the dishwasher has settled into its steady hum, and I imagine your town streetlights and your own kitchen chairs and your own notebooks and the way your porch sounds when someone you love is finally coming home. The shower upstairs runs sometimes, and I will catch myself pausing, dish towel in my hand, listening for the click, listening for the footsteps. I still look at the staircase when Miles' number appears on my phone, like I'm expecting the house to provide me an answer. It never does. But the house holds us still. The maple tells the wind how to behave. The white tablecloth is folded in the drawer like a promise I have every intention of keeping. When Oliver is in bed and the lights are off and the world is quieted, I sit at the table with that narrow spiral notebook. I flip back to the first page, to the entry that reads, 9:38 a.m. Emily says office, left in sky blue dress. Miles says Emily boarded BOS flight seat 2A. I run my thumb along the ink, not to erase it. I wouldn't, even if I could, but to bless it for being the place where confusion turned into courage. Then I turn the page and I write what happened today. Oliver made a rocket with toothpicks and marshmallows, and it finally stood up by itself. Jessa laughed at a show she's seen before in a way that made me love reruns. Caleb remembered to switch the laundry. Miles texted a photo of cloud tops that looked exactly like a comforter you'd pull over a boy who doesn't want to go to sleep. Mrs. Atkins left a lemon bar shaped like Ohio. The maple tree dropped a leaf on the porch, and I left it there, and it looked like a signature. The world will always be too big for one woman to understand in a day. But kitchens are exactly the right size for miracles no one posts on the internet. If I have learned anything from this year, it is that truth, when spoken in a voice that loves the person it names, can turn a house with a mystery in it into a home again. I am not naive. People stray and lie and run and spend and return and refuse in every decade. But every decade also holds women who answer the phone and say the sentence that keeps hearts on their courses. Tell me what you saw. Then they lay a clean cloth on a table, and they set down a stack of papers anyone could find, and they pour iced tea no one drinks, and they say, "Here is where we tell the truth and eat, both, and somehow both get finished." A year after the wedding, Oliver brought home a school worksheet that asked him to write one sentence about what he had learned this month. He wrote, I learned that you can land in bad weather if you follow the lights. He drew a little airplane on the line below. I taped it to the fridge next to the grocery list and the magnet from the dentist and the photo of him when he was small enough to be folded into a blanket like a butter roll. Emily is somewhere in the city, maybe in a condo with windows, maybe in a room with no windows at all. I hope she finds her lights. I hope she lands. If you are out there listening from a town I have never been to, from a kitchen in a house that has a staircase you are staring at right this minute, I am telling you something plain. You are not alone. Your notebook and your lemon bars and your neighbor with the binder and your son who fixes bridges and your other son who calls you from the sky, they are all part of the way through. It is not simple. It is not quick. It is sometimes not even fair, but it is yours, and you will recognize it when you see it. It will look like a boy laughing with a marshmallow stuck to his tooth. It will look like a woman who was hired to pretend being asked to stay for dinner. It will look like a grandmother writing while the house breathes around her. It will look like truth, which isn't a pretty word, but my goodness, it is a trustworthy one. And if, one day, you look up on a flight tracker app and see a plane arcing from Columbus to Boston and wonder if seat 2A is occupied by someone who told one story to the ground and another to the sky, put your phone down and go set the table. When the people you love walk through your door, hand them a napkin and choose your next sentence like it matters, because it does. Say, I am glad you are home, and mean it when it is true. Say, we will talk after dinner, and mean it when it is too hard to do before. Say, I will not throw this plate, and then do not throw it. Say, I will listen, and then listen. Say, this is my kitchen and my family and my pen, and I will use all three with the courage I found on a day when the phone rang, and a voice from 36,000 feet told me something that split me open. And I decided I would rather be a woman split open by truth than stitched shut by a lie. I think God hears sentences like that. I think children do too. I think houses remember them. I know I do.